Pacific Time broadcast. And before we waste any more time, let's get right into it. We're going to cover the vaccine update, labor, tax changes, housing, stock market, econ map. So real quick, where we are is we have some very positive news. And that news is that when the vaccine was first approved on December 14th, you can kind of see the last 4 or 5 weeks, we went from 87 million doses. As of the April 22nd, we're up to 135 million doses. And as that increased from 59.73 the week prior to 69.95 per 100 people that have been dosed. Here's the really good news on the vaccine. As of today, the numbers are in 540,000 unfortunate passings because of the virus, and 85% of those were over age 65 or with at high risk people. However, the number of virus cases are now down 70%. Our only remaining portion that we have to, or issue that we have to cover, is getting the younger people vaccinated. But again, I want to state we are down now 70% in the amount of new cases. This is great news that we are on the road to recovery. However, let's talk about labor and what's going on with labor. While labor looks good, there is something that's looming here in the near future. So as of yesterday, we had 547,000 new claims filed. That's down from the week before at 576 claims, and down from the week prior to that at 755,000 claims. We haven't really changed a big outcome of our unemployment rate. It's still at 5.7%, but we are on the road to recovery. However, here's the big looming problem. There is a labor shortage. I know you might say to yourself, well, this is ridiculous. How could there be a labor shortage when there's still 12 to 14 million people unemployed? Well, we have a situation in our country right now that is going back to the pre-Clinton years. Now, I will state very clearly, I was not a fan of Clinton in many regards. However, there was one thing that he did do that I would say I was in agreement with. He really reduced the eligibility for welfare recipients. He tried to make it, well, he and his administration tried to make it where the welfare system was really available for those people who truly needed it. That means that they had an emergency, a family emergency. They were either physically or mentally disabled, and I really liked what they did in those years. However, we are now going back to pre-Clinton years, and we're seeing that in the form of labor shortages. Look, the bottom line is this. If we can't learn from history, we're going to be condemned to live it again. At no time in history has any society that was socialistic based or communist based lasted. The only societies that have ever lasted were capitalistic types of societies. However, when we look at the labor shortages and we look at what's happening as to why can't these small businesses and even large businesses that are reopening get people to work for them? Well, we saw this during the first round. Let's take a look at what's going on. We have 5.7% employment. There is, at this point, for many people, no incentive to return to work. Why? Now you have $300 per month per child in tax-free credits. That means that if you had 3 children, or someone had 3 children, it would be providing $9,600 per year. That's almost 25% of the average wage base. The average wage base for a female in the U.S. right now is $45,000. For a male, it's $52,000. So you're talking almost 25%. It would make sense that in many cases, if there was one high income earner with the child tax credit, it actually pays to keep one of the parents home. Unemployment now averages $40,000 in annual wages. Now there's a week cap on it, up to 30 weeks. But when somebody's on unemployment and they're getting all these benefits, there is no incentive to return. There's mortgage and rent forbearance. And we now know that a lot of the 2.7 million people that are in mortgage forbearance are pulling the whole New York move, which is let's wait until the last minute and maybe the government will just extend it, forgive it, whatever it might be. We now have housing assistance through Section 8 and housing assistance emergency programs. We have food stamps. We have stimulus checks, and we take a look at these stimulus checks. We had 2 checks that are coming in, $1,200 and $1,400. We have student forgiveness. There's over, and here's the problem, there's over $2 trillion that has been saved. So what I'm saying is, during this virus, people either A, they spent less money, obvious. B, they're getting all this government free aid, and I'll throw a C in there. They might be getting both, which means that there really is no incentive to go back to work. Now, I'm going to go back to what I call the greatest generation in the world, in our country, which is the World War II generation. I would love to see that kind of generational incentive return to where people are invigorated, they're committed, they're patriots, they want to go back to work, they want to contribute. We will never stay as the most competitive country in the world if we do not keep our work ethic and our incentivized program. So what I'm saying is, we're going to see how this fits into the econ map. And I'm studying these numbers right now, and we may be making a version 7 to the econ map depending upon what happens when these people start getting their second round of stimulus, what happens with the mortgage forbearance, what happens with the additional money per child, the tax care credit. Now, what do I think that means? I mean that it's going to have a decrease in productivity in our companies, our country's companies. It will not necessarily bode terrible for the stock market, because people will have more or the same cash flow because the government is bailing them out. But it does have a currency exchange. Now, back at the beginning of this virus, people asked, well, what is our currency going to do in the competitive market? And I explained that when all of the world is in a pandemic and the countries are issuing stimulus checks, where it's that same old saying, when the tide rises, all boats rise. When the tide goes down, all boats go down. However, this dynamic is very different because our country is continuing to issue stimulus when we do not need it and taking away the incentive to go back to work. This becomes a very dangerous, slippery slope. Housing. I have some numbers here, but I really want to give you an opinion upon housing. What we're learning now within the incentivized world of labor could also have a detrimental effect on housing. It may have a longer term effect, and as you know, my circle of opportunity, which we'll cover in the econ map, is somewhere in the fourth quarter of 2021 to first quarter of 2022. However, this labor shortage, this de-incentivizing the labor force, as well as the 2.7 mortgage forbearances, could really stagger us into a housing crash. Now, again, when you read a lot of the things that are out there in the internet and the general publications, this is an exact repeat of 2006, 2007. Now, 2006, 2007, I had a radio show before, streaming, and I kept sounding the alarm that when the real estate communities and when the real estate investment communities start always buffering over the fact like this will never happen, we're in a new era, we won't see a crash because it's different than every other crash, that is when we start to get worried. Now, not worried from a standpoint of we're going to lose money. We're worried for those people that are not planning. Now, there's two sides of this. There's the side of opportunity and there's a side to loss. If you are not planning and you are going out and you are buying a house you cannot afford, you are mortgaging up because interest rates are low, this is a bad time to do that. I do not suggest going out and adding to your real estate portfolio right now. I do think next year, March, is probably going to be the most opportunistic time. But again, that triggers on a couple factors. One of the biggest factors is our labor force. If our labor force continues to be de-incentivized and we do not see some big numbers of new jobs being filled, that is going to put me on a completely different pathway. In addition, if the government comes out and they issue a forbearance extension or a forbearance forgiveness, this could also have a detriment to the housing market and the numbers that we're calculating. So again, right now, my opinion is do not change anything with the plan. The plan right now is fourth quarter to first quarter of 2021 is when we start looking for those opportunities. But again, this triggers on the forbearance. It triggers on the labor force, adhesion to labor. Okay, it's forbearance. Well, right now we know that there's about in May of last year, there was 5 million mortgages that were in forbearance. In October, there went to 3.5 million, February 2.7. But of the total amount of mortgages that our entire country has outstanding in the form of FHA and Fannie Mae, 5% are in forbearance. And that's a pretty dangerous proposition. All right, let's jump over to the stock market and see where we stand there. As of yesterday, the S&P 500 was at 4134. If we look at our running little tab here, back on March 5th, we had a 3.7% increase in a 64-day period of time, which was annualized. Because again, a lot of times people will say, well, the stock market is up by whatever. We always calculate, benchmark, and compare returns based upon an annualized rate of return. So we can see here on April 22nd, the S&P 500, which is the widest benchmark, is 10. Well, let me clarify. Widest known, not widest coverage of number of investments, is 10.5%, 10.05, increase in 109 days. Annualized, we're still at 33% annualized rate of return. Our econ map right now, I'm on version 6. I'm not going to push that to version 7 until we get a little bit more intel on labor adhesion, labor going back to work, and we see what's happening with the workforce. So right now, our circle of opportunity with real estate is still fourth quarter. Again, the biggest determinant, which I've been talking about since last August, is the tax changes that will happen will have an effect on the stock market. Again, if you read a lot of media, they'll say, well, certain corporations do not believe that the tax rate will have any effect on the stock market. Of course it does. It has historically always had an effect on our stock market. And if we now go to these ridiculous, absolutely draconian tax rates that this new administration is proposing, and at the same time we're issuing all of this stimulus to de-incentivize our workforce at the same time of increasing our national debt and spreading that debt amongst all the taxpayers. We are in trouble for 3 to 4 years out from today. Again, what we're talking about here today is the next year to year and a half, we're seeing some giant opportunities. But 3 to 4 years out, we're going to need to make some serious adjustments to calculate that. So again, the stock market, I would not change anything in the stock market right now. I would not pull back to cash. I would not pull back to bonds. We still have a lot of steam left in this because remember, not everybody has gotten their stimulus checks. The $3,600 per year per child tax credits have not been fully fulfilled. There's still a lot of money being pumped into the country. The ERC for business owners, that's the employee retention credit, the PPP. All of that still has a lot of money to be spent out, which means more money in the economy. The $2 trillion has not been spent out. So again, when we see this idea of the stock market bubble, we have to look at valuations and what is sustainable. And in certain things, they're not sustainable. But in a lot of things where people are spending money, what we call the new paradigm portfolio, they are fully sustainable because people are continuing to spend money. Again, we're taking this strategy from the 1920 playbook. That was the Spanish flu. That's where people were locked up for a year to 2 years. When they got out, they spent everything they had, then they went into debt, and then they started risking in the stock market. I still think we're a little bit far away from that, but we can use that human psychology to understand what's going to happen going forward if we're using that same time period, which was the same repeat of what we're going through right now. All right, actions to take. Change the portfolio to a paradigm shift portfolio, refinance real estate, get those rates down, lock the bank down as much as you can. If you got some extra cash, cash it out. And I'm not saying, people are coming to me, they're saying, are you saying to keep money in cash until the real estate market is more opportunistic? No, I'm not saying that at all. That's not what I would do. I would put my money into selected investments in these types of paradigm portfolios. And then when the real estate comes up, I can either A, sell some of that, B, I can also borrow against it. So I would be looking to leverage into the real estate in a year to year and a half from now, but I would be looking to lock down the lowest interest rates that I can on my real estate. Again, that's another reason to why to consider the reverse mortgages today. Again, long-term bonds, I would reduce those back to short and intermediate term bonds and start looking at your tax strategies. Meaning if you have, let's say, some losses, some large losses, and you have alternatives that you can swap to, I would start calculating some of those harvest losses. But again, you have to have a good alternative to swap to. All right, well, that's it for today's show. Listen, before I wrap it up today, is if you have not yet joined our YouTube page, subscribe to it, just go ahead and in your Google browser, just Google H&H Retirement on YouTube. You can click on the red button. It'll subscribe you to the page. And this way, if you can't make it on Fridays at 4 o'clock Pacific, you can always get an email and always go right back in and watch those videos at a later time. And lastly, before I wrap it up, if you've got any questions, feel free to give our office a call. It's 844-702-1040. Again, it's 844-702-1040.